Okay, so this is the W3C WebRTC Working Group meeting for April. And we have 2 hours today and a whole bunch of stuff to get through. So a reminder about the IPR policy, we abide by it, and only people and companies listed on the page are allowed to make substantive contributions. So here's what we're going to try to go through. We will have a discussion on integration of WebNN with media capture transform, some issues in WebRTC extensions and WebRTC PC. Harold will talk about voice isolation, and then we have a lot with suggested content hint and avoid user confusion. And then UN will talk about region capture. If time permits, Yanivar has some slides as well. And if time doesn't permit, we have meetings coming up on May 17th, the 21st of June, and July 19th. And we can get to whatever we don't get to today. Okay, so the slides, as usual, are up on the wiki. And we do need a note taker. Do we have a volunteer?
I can take note.
Okay, thank you very much, Ewan. Okay, so a little bit about the code of conduct. We operate under it. We're all passionate about improving WebRTC, but let's try to keep it cordial and professional. As we mentioned, the meeting's being recorded. If you, we are trying to manage the queue, so type +Q and -Q in Google Meet chat. And I don't know, is that Harold? Anyway, Harold, can you manage the queue?
I can do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And please state your name. It'll help us figure it out. So a little bit about document status. We just try to tell everyone that just because something's in a W3C repo doesn't mean it's been adopted. We've been having to call for adoptions on this. And editor's drafts don't represent working group consensus. Working group drafts do. And it is possible to merge PRs that lack consensus if you attach a note indicating that. Okay, so here I mentioned what we're going to try to get through today. It's a lot of stuff, so we are going to try to keep time fairly strictly. And I'll try to do it. Maybe Harold. We'll see if we need to keep on track though. All right. So first item is WebNN media capture transform integration. I know do you want to present this? I added some slides just for background. Maybe I'll present those. I guess, Dom, you opened the issue on November 10th, and the idea was to build a prototype integrating media capture transform with TensorFlow.js, background blur, and then measure performance. And the focus was on video because that's where we think the issues would crop up, if there are any. So so this was done, and this is what a discussion of what it all means is coming up. So if you look at the thread, there were several issues that were raised. One was garbage collection. There is a PR that's in progress about that. It turns out that it helps if you report video frame external memory as released when you call videoframe.close. And it apparently improves the garbage collection and doesn't create as big a spike. That PR is not merged yet, so you wouldn't see that. Another thing is copy removal. And I guess we'll discuss more about this if we understand it. And I guess, Dom, you thought that probably a bunch of copies going on from the GPU to the CPU. I guess we'll explore that more. And the third issue was WebNN, web GPU integration, and whether we're using the right textures and shaders and all that stuff to do this. Okay, so I guess there is a sample app up there where you can look at things and get your own idea of how things perform. It integrates breakout box with various transforms, including WebGL, WebGPU, stuff like that. And I guess you do have to, for the WebNN, you do have to go in and Chrome flags and enable that specific feature, or it won't be available.
So that feature is of course released now. But
yeah,
it doesn't work in a worker yet.
Right. Although I think what we're dealing with here may not need that yet, although that was one of the goals. Okay. So why don't we just get into the, do you want to talk to this slide? And then there's some other slides we can get into. I guess there were questions about the details.
Ninchin?
Yes, I'm online. Yeah. So yeah, so my name is Ningxin Hu. I'm working for Intel, and now I'm participating in the WCC Web Machine Learning Working Group with NC there. I'm a co-editor of the Web and Spec there. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Bernard. So I think for yeah, actually this slide is like a high-level pipeline, and there's some components there to build up this video processing pipeline, specifically for the background blur feature there. So actually, the boxes here actually marked with some like a GPU texture or a VXO. That actually this is the web GPU version with WebM capability, WebM graph interface there. So basically, this is a web GPU plus WebM processing pipeline. And in the screenshot Bernard just showed, there is another pipeline that using WebGL for the processing. And for that pipeline, the segmentation here, the ML graph per infer step in that pipeline is the TensorFlow .js WebGL backend there. So yeah, so basically this pipeline is running. We have two versions. One is running in the main thread, another is running in the worker. So the screenshot and the link just shared is for the worker, but basically is pipeline code and the steps are same. So yeah, so in the transform callback, so basically we got the video frames, and we have the first step is import that video frame. So basically, yeah, the import here is like just a function, but actually underline current demo we sample, we use two APIs. The first is create an image bitmap from that video frame. Then we use in the WebGL case, so we use the texture 2D. If let me see, yeah, the text image 2D to upload that video image bitmap to WebGL texture. And in the GPU plus WebM case, we use a copy external image to texture API there. Then we have a GPU texture. So in the GPU texture, basically we do two processing. One is just blur the whole image, and that takes a video frame and texture and blur that into another GPU texture. If we focus on here the GPU pipeline. Yeah, so on another pass, because we need to figure out which pixel is the background, which pixel is the foreground, right? So we first we need to run some machine learning model there. So we use another shader, for example, in this pipeline to so-called tensorize this GPU texture into a tensor that can be taken for the ML execution. For example, they have some requirement for the input for that machine learning model. So we need that, for example, do some normalization and some turn it to like float point and do some like normalization and standardization, something like this. So yeah, then we turn it all this pixel in the texture into a GPU buffer. Then we feed that into the WebM graph. Here, as Bern mentioned, we depend on the interop API between WebM and the web GPU. So the WebM graph there can take a web GPU buffer as the input. Then that graph, we infer that graph, it will output the so-called segmentation map into another GPU buffer that basically tells you which object of that pixel it is. For example, it's a background or it's another object, because we're using a deep lab v3 model that can tell you that can classify that each pixel into up to 21 classes. So if I remember. So yeah, correctly. Then another shader. Take these two together, like actually the three inputs together: the original video texture, the blurred video, the GPU texture, blurred texture, and the segmentation map, and based on that to create out the output that like pick the a pixel from the origin texture if the pixel is like a foreground, and pick up the pixel from the blurred texture if this pixel is classified as a background. Then this all seems will be drawn into our off-screen canvas. As the last step was that after this all done, so this example will create a new video frame from this canvas, and feed that into the controller that passed from the transform callback. Then that's basically the pipeline. Yeah. So yeah, so yeah, so as I mentioned, that the WebGL pipeline is basically similar, but the segmentation is done by WebGL shader that's implemented by TensorFlow.js WebGL backend, and there is also a to do that we want to. Also do this for the web GPU, because TensorFlow.js also has a web GPU backend, but due to some gaps there. So this is not done yet. Will be done as the next step. So far, we tested like the pure WebGL backend and the web GPU plus WebM execution. So yeah, today, yeah. So that's the high level description of this pipeline. Yeah, some bullets here share that we basically profiled the sample. We also Dom reads that there looks like some not so very low CPU usage there, no matter you run it on main thread or in a worker. So yeah, basically after profiling, we see that there like the 35 percent of CPU usage in this sample actually spent on the create image map, and another 20 spent on the GC. So yeah, we are wondering whether we can improve that by like the create image map is used for the video frame import to GPU texture. So yeah, so actually there are I was told that there are copies there, because there are some like color convention or other processing that turn a video frame into a texture with a copy. So yeah, so that may be one area we want to improve. I was told that there's some new API like import external image to texture, something like this will be introduced in web GPU as an extension. Or so yeah, so we will test that out if it is in place. And also on the GC part, so yeah, Bernard shared that there are some efforts to improve the video frame side, because you see there are video frame, we got a video frame, and also we create a video frame at the end, right? And also there are some like some objects allocated to run this web GPU pipeline. For example, when every video frame input to a texture, we create a view and also reband it to the band group of the web GPU pipeline to run the shader. So yeah, so probably there can be improved that to reduce this kind of dynamic objects allocation during this process. So that's another area probably can be explored. So just my thought. I'm thinking on the high level whether we can have some some configuration or a setup before the pipeline running. That, for example, we set that where is the video frame to import or all the the buffers, the textures be used for this pipeline. Then when this pipeline run, just yes, to run it as a setup instead of create something in the fly when the processing in the processing pipeline inside itself, right? So that may be, yeah. So some areas can be think about, yeah. The last thing, but not the yeah, the last thing is about some performance issue I observed during this development. I observed on some entry-level GPU that to run the WebGL-based pipeline that actually put a high pressure on the GPU for this pipeline, so it may cross the whole browser's harm without have some mechanisms that can control this kind of flow control. Because for example, if this process is too heavy, probably can slow down the frame feeding to this processing pipeline. So yeah, so that's the thing I would like to share. So yeah, so that's all. I will pause here.
Yeah, so I had a question. You mentioned the import has a copy, and we can see that. And I guess there's a proposal to go directly from the video frame to the GPU external texture. How about the output? Is there a copy there as well? To the off-screen canvas and then to the export to video frame?
I'm not sure actually, so I need some education here, or the web GPU expert can chime in.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we need to do a
Yeah.
conversion both ways or just one way.
I believe both ways. We need
Okay,
the
so we
input
need
and
both
the
ways.
export. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Sorry, Tim Panton was in the queue before you.
Yeah, we've got got two queues. I'm probably in the wrong one. So just, I know this is very subjective, but what's the was the performance acceptable? Like, do we really have to be pushing down to get the performance massively better, or is this like in the right ballpark and we just need to tweak it a little?
Ninchin, I think that's for you.
Okay, so yeah, so my take is probably because this is a long run sim, probably we need to measure that is like a power or a battery impact on this. Yeah, so I think this is like a one, as I know, is one like a sim people are interested that how this like a video processing or video conference application consume your power or drain your battery, right? So that thing we need to figure out, but we don't know that yet. But maybe Dom highlight emphasis the CPU usage is one aspect of that. So yeah, so it's my take. So my idea is to, if we can reduce the power consumption as less as possible, that will be good to improve the user experience, because that people actually I heard some feedback from that side. So
yeah, I'll comment quickly on what we're doing with this prototyping. I think we're doing two things. One is checking what improvement we can get by using hardware accelerated neural network processing with WebNN. The other thing we're doing is evaluating some of the roadblocks anyone that might be using media capture transform might be hitting when doing video processing, in particular when trying to do full GPU video processing, because these memory copies that appear here are not specific to background blur or to machine learning processing. They are really anytime you want to apply some GPU processing to a video frame. And more recently, some of the questions around, for instance, pixel format and color space conversion that are implicit in the diagram that Ninxing is presenting have surfaced in other places, and I think will impact our architecture down the line. So that's the two ways I'm looking at this prototype and its current performance results. And I believe we have UN in the queue.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the GC, which is 20%, and so on. And I'm wondering whether that's something that is like that can be fixed by implementations underneath JavaScript, or whether there's an issue with creation of a lot of objects very repetitively. Like for every frame, you're creating your GPU buffer and so on. Like, and it's happening a lot. And what usually is done with native implementations is you have a buffer pool. And I'm wondering whether this is something that should be surfaced to JavaScript applications, or whether user agents will be smart enough to use buffer pools underneath in implementations so that these GC and perf issues are decreased a lot.
Yeah, so to answer the first question, that the GPU buffer actually I allocated before the processing pipeline running. So basically in the setup stage, so all the GPU buffers are allocated. But there is like as I mentioned, there are some theme that's created for every frame. That is we import a video frame into a GPU texture. Then we need to get this texture and view and band into the band group of that processing pipeline. That I believe created some new objects there for every frame. So that's why I have some high level idea whether we can have like something to band this before the pipeline. Then we just can like a developer can specify where is video importance the destination. Probably we can get it pre-allocated buffer or texture there, then just populate that buffer without create it every time, right? Then the GPU, I mean the web GPU processing pipeline could be like could be static without a change for every frame. So I believe that will avoid many new objects allocation. So yeah, so that's my take. So but I'm not sure that underlying implementation side optimization would help. So I believe so, but I don't have many experience or source there. So.
Ninxin, since there is no one else in the queue, I wonder, can you say maybe a bit more about the next steps in that project? What kind of timeline do you expect for future iterations?
So there are two items currently in my to-do list. One is like to enable the web GPU TensorFlow.js backend in this pipeline. So we have we can understand that how this can work with like a WebGL. We already have that. Then work with the pure web GPU processing. Then with a web GPU plus WebN there. So that's one thing. So we have the PR in work in progress that to fix that in the TensorFlow.js web GPU backend. So that's one item. Another one, as I mentioned, is that there is so I was told there is a new API that can import the external. Bernard just mentioned that import a video frame as an external texture to web GPU. So yeah, so I will try to use that and see whether we can reduce the current image bitmap cost on the CPU to see how far we can go. And yeah, so that's the immediate two steps I think about. Another one probably is we can also measure that Bernard shared that there is a sale in Chromium that to fix the video frame or improve the video frame GC scenario. So probably we can also try it once that merged. So to report out what we found. So yeah, so that's basically the things in my mind. So yeah, so I also want to hear feedbacks here. So anything I missed or we should find out more. So yeah.
Chris Cunningham, do you have any comments?
Hey y'all, sorry, I'm dealing with a sick kid over here. I'm kind of a fly on the wall, but I'm not paying close attention to be helpful.
Okay.
So I have one more comment since we are talking about CPU efficiency and so on. So currently you're doing ping pong between main thread and worker thread. So I'm guessing that it might be small, but maybe it's not negligible as well. So maybe when everything will be done in a worker, you will transfer the media stream track and do everything in a worker. Then maybe there will be a small perf improvement as well. So that might be worth experimenting when it's available.
So I'm sorry. So my understanding, we as I shared, we have a worker version of this one. So in that one, actually, I believe we already transferred the media track to that worker. Then all the like a process is happening on worker without transfer objects between the main thread and the worker in the processing pipeline. So I'm not sure is that you suggest we do or we already have that in place. So
oh, okay. I thought Chrome was did not have support yet for that, but maybe it has already, and you're using it. Then it's great if you're transferring the track. That's great to hear.
okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, they may be transferring
think,
the streams, but yeah, maybe.
So I guess my main takeaway items is potentially look at that conversion. I know there was a PR proposed for web codecs to do the conversion. And I think one of the questions was whether we knew exactly what the conversion ought to be. Are you saying that if we did the conversion between video frame and GPU external texture, that would be used by WebMNN? And that's the one that's the conversion we want back and forth?
If the yeah, so for WebM currently the interop interface is designed to take the web GPU buffer or web GPU texture. So if
Right.
the conversion, yeah, already done that, so WebM can take, I think, yeah.
Okay. All right. I think time is up for this item, but thank you very much, Nixon.
No problem. Yeah.
And we will move on to discussion of some WebRTC extensions and WebRTC PC items. Here's what we're going to try to get through. 2 items on WebRTC extensions and then a bunch of simulcast issues that have cropped up. Okay, so issue 95 was about potentially deprecating audio video enumeration and get capabilities in favor of the media capabilities API. This is issue 95 in WebRTC extensions. And then we also have issue 185, which was in media capabilities, which was about retrieving RTC, RTP codec capability from media capabilities when you query it with type WebRTC. So I think we've pretty much concluded how to do that, which is that you use the content type value to represent the audio and video codecs with stuff like profile ID in the content type, so that it provides the RTC RTP codec capability much as it would in get capabilities. And then you get the result returned from media capabilities, which provides the RTC RTP codec capability dictionary. And you can then use that as input to set codec preferences to set your preferred video codec. So that's basically how things are designed. And this is an example out of 185, where essentially you put in the media config and you put in your content type. In this case, the audio one is audio opus, and you put in your channels and your bit rate and sample rate. And then for video, this one is VP9 with profile ID 1. And then as usual in media capabilities, you put in the width, height, bit rate, and frame rate. And then you call media capabilities, in this case, the decoding side, and you get back a result. And your RTC RTP media capabilities is in the WebRTC codec member. So this is basically how things are proposed to work. So there are a few differences, though, which is that media capabilities currently returns information relating to classic audio and video codecs like Opus, VP8, VP9, H.264, etc. Whereas get capabilities returns a bunch of other stuff like header extensions, and the codecs portion returns things that you wouldn't think of as a classic audio video codec, like DTMF, telephone event, comfort noise, ULP FEC, other RTX red, stuff like that. So it's more stuff than is in media capabilities at the moment. So here's an example of what media capabilities looks like. As you can see, this is you have an example of audio red, and then comfort noise with 2 different clock rates, and telephone event with 2 different clock rates. I guess one is for Opus and one is for G711 or G722. Here's what it looks like on the video side, where it returns RTX, red, ULP FEC, and then flex FEC as well. So here are the questions for the working group. So basically the overall question is it a goal for media capabilities to actually encompass get capabilities and deprecate it? Is that a goal? And if so, should media capabilities for WebRTC provide all information on all the codecs? So telephone event, comfort noise, FEC, RTX, red, all that stuff. And then if we were to do that, would the results make sense? So would these non-codec codecs, would they ever be power efficient or smooth? And then there's a question of would width, height, frame rate, bit rate, would that stuff ever affect the results? So I guess we want to open it up for discussion. Let's see who we have in the queue.
Johan is in the queue.
Okay.
Johan,
What did you manage? Can you manage the queue, Dom? Thanks.
So my understanding is that media capabilities is really about audio and video codecs, and that's all. So I don't think it makes sense to expose CN or DTMF in media capabilities. So that should stay in media capability. That should stay in get capabilities. But all the audio video codecs, the real ones like AV1 and so on, media capabilities is a better place. So that's where I would like the web to move. When you query audio or video codecs, you go to media capabilities, and when you have like WebRTC specific stuff, you go to get capabilities. And that will solve some issues that we have with get capabilities. For instance, it is a synchronous API, and it's okay with CN, FEC, and so on, because they're done in software, and we know really easily whether they're available or not. But for hardware codecs, it's more difficult to do that synchronously. And media capabilities being promise-based, it's a bit better. So that's my answer. So no, it's not a goal to deprecate it, to fully deprecate it. But yes, it's a goal to partially deprecate get capabilities.
I think Florent, you were in the queue.
Yes. So I agree with some of the points that you made. Media capabilities should probably not have RTX, FEC, and all of those non-standard real codecs. But I do believe that we need a place to have those. And at the moment, it is get capabilities. I agree that get capabilities is not a great API as it is not a sync. And when querying it, results might be delayed and it doesn't really work with a synchronous API. And I think we should probably focus on fixing that rather than trying to add API media capabilities, which is made for a specific request about a specific codec, rather than listing all the different codecs that we have. If we tried, for example, to use, if we didn't have any API for listing all the codecs and try to get similar use to set codec preferences as we have now, we would need to make many calls to media capabilities to get all the WebRTC codecs in order to construct the array of codecs that we want to pass to set codec preferences. And that would be a big usability regression. So we would probably need to address those issues as well.
Chris?
Hey, sorry, I got a moment away from my kid for a second. I just want to say that for my part as the media capabilities editor, Ewan's, and it seems like Ewan and sorry, I forget the name of the person who just spoke, are mostly aligned. And I'm fine with that outcome for media capabilities to be focused on real codecs, if you will, and to leave the other codecs to the domain of get capabilities. There is an interesting question still about do you want to return the RTC codec info from media capabilities? I think the previous speaker kind of was circling that question. If the answer to that question is yes, I do want to ask that Ewan and other folks on this call take a look at the media capabilities issue, where I'm trying to really nail down the steps on how to disambiguate the input from media capabilities to reliably produce a RTC codec info, if that is a desirable outcome. Ewan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a desirable outcome. I think I filed an issue about that. So it's great that you're working on it. And yes, we should be able to, we need to disambiguate the outcome because it's useful for WebRTC, but it might be also useful in the future for web codecs plus web transport for WebRTC-like applications as well. To get back to Florent's point about being able to list all video codecs or all audio codecs that WebRTC supports, I think it's a non-goal. We want to move away from that. Media capabilities is really about you as an application. You are an SFU, so you're probably supporting a few codecs, and that's the ones you actually want to check with media capabilities. It will be a few calls for media capabilities, and you have promised all that will solve most of the issues there. So I don't think it's a usability trouble for SFU applications. For peer-to-peer cases, I would think that you might not need set codec preferences at all because you want to expose all codecs and then the SDP negotiation to happen and pick the best codec between the two peer-to-peer endpoints. So that's why I think that not exposing real codecs in get capabilities we are a long way from that, but I think it's a desirable goal, and not listing all codecs that are supported with just one call.
Okay, I think it sounds like we got an answer to the questions on this slide, which is that media capabilities doesn't have to provide information on all the fake codecs, and it's not a goal to deprecate get capabilities or get rid of get capabilities, but just to provide enhanced info. So I think we can move on to issue 100.
Wait, you have a long queue of people that want to
Okay.
speak. Yanivar, Harald, and Flora.
Yes, sorry. So I thought Bernard had a good point that we could maybe move on, and that we have answered this slide, but I think some good points were raised by UN. And I think we do have a problem where get capabilities is synchronous, and so it sounds like it'd be good to clarify that if we do, there seems to be a still goal of if we deprecate real codecs from sender get capabilities, that would solve the asynchronous problem that we have. And I think that sounds like a good long-term goal for me. And if there are usability issues with using media capabilities for this, we should probably look at that in the media capability spec to streamline that there. That's my input. Thanks.
Harald?
I do worry that with all this stuff about RTX, red, and FEC, we need to have that information somewhere. I mean, if we keep get capabilities around, we have a method that has known problems as the recommended and only way to get that information. And I worry a bit about the leaving get capabilities in there because making changes to get capabilities is actually harder than deprecating it because it will be a most confusing change to the users. And one of the issues with get capabilities is actually its fingerprintability. So if we keep both around, then and we kind of have a direction to say that, okay, real codecs go into media capabilities, and but we still don't have a badly designed interface for the rest of the stuff. So we're teeing up more work. That might be okay. We might need a completely different way of thinking about the problem of getting the additional information. So in the long run, it should be, I think get capabilities should be deprecated and removed, but we need to have functionality that covers everything it covers. I think that's all I worry about at this moment. Otherwise, I'm happy with the conclusions.
And I would say that, yes, as you mentioned, UN, there's two different scenarios where people would use set codec preferences. One would be when a peer is talking to an SFU, and in this case, you know which codecs you would target, and then you can make target specific queries to media capabilities, if I understood you correctly. In the peer-to-peer scenario, you might have a different behavior, and I believe right now, if you're not able to enumerate all the codecs, you will not be able to call set codec preferences, really. You would need to hardcode a list of codecs but you would need to check, and I don't think that's really usable. and we'll need something different. Is there a way to get capabilities to evolve in a different shape that would satisfy everyone? That's probably a direction that I would like to see if it's possible. There's also a lot of usage of Git capabilities currently with codec preferences, so deprecation will be difficult.
Yeah. So my suggestion to everybody is to bring some of these great ideas to the GitHub issue, and or maybe fork another one. I would like to try to get to the issue 100, which Sergio put in. Can we move? Okay, so this is issue 100, which is inactive by default codecs. And Sergio put in the use case here, which is he's adding VP9 profiles 1 and 3 and H.264 high, 2 of those. And then you get this enormous SDP. So the question is there a way to have some of these codecs disabled by default so they don't always appear in the offer if you're not interested in them? And FIPO notes that they've had these problems before. You can run out of payload types in the upper range. We talked about issue 99, I think, last month. And this is a very similar problem. So this was some of the ideas that were put forward to fix this. And so kind of like to open this up to discussion. You have any comments, Sergio?
No, I mean, I think that I just wanted to write the issue. I mean, because the SDP was huge, and I think that as Philips has said, it has very or similar to what we have in the header extension. So probably we can reuse or use a similar API in both. But I don't have any preference of over the solution that we could implement.
Johan?
Yeah, in general, I think it might be fine. My main worry is what are the defaults? Would they be the same for all browsers? And some codecs are now the default, but at some point we might want to make them off by default, like legacy codecs and so on. So how do we envision this evolution? And this might create web compat issues as well. So that's what's the solution there? What are your thoughts there?
At least the one that I am using, some of them, for example, are receive only. So I think that these is already handled inside the WebRTC. For example, the H.264 high profile, something like that. I think that the ones that I don't know. I mean, probably just common sense. I mean, probably not everyone is going to use VP9 profile 1, 2, 3 or H.264 high profile. So probably maybe those are off by default, but and have and we can have the same the other ones enabled by default as for now. But I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on that.
Yeah, just to mention that the case that I'm worrying is the peer-to-peer case, where if the defaults are different between two user agents at some point, even though both user agents are supporting H.264, for instance, they will not use it because one is off by default and not the other one, and there will be no available video codecs that are in common in the SDP. So that's why we need to have like clear rules about how we are handling this.
Yeah, but I think that here at least my proposal was to have off by default in the offer, but if you receive it in the offer, you can add it in the answer. So it is just what codecs do you provide in the offer. So for example, in this case, if you receive an offer with I will say it VP9 profile 3, you will be able to answer that in the answer, but you will not offer it by default. So in this case, in the peer-to-peer, you will be able negotiate even with a codec that you don't have enabled, because the enabling is only for the ones for the codecs that are going to go into the offer, not in the answer.
We have Harold in the queue.
Yeah, so looking at the way this is set up, you need two interfaces. One is the list of codecs you're currently willing to offer, and one is the set of codecs that you can offer, where get capabilities probably suffices for the first one, and the one on the screen probably suffices for the second. Offer by default is not needed when you have codecs to offer. It's simply what codecs to offer are initialized to. And as for the interoperability, well, I think we should probably push our mandatory to implements up to mandatory to offer. Even though they're old and clunky, they are our safety net against non-interoperability. Not saying that it's impossible to turn them off, but by default, we need to offer everything that's in the mandatory to implement.
Florent?
Yeah, I look at this interface, and it seems like there is a lot of overlap with current set codec preferences and possibly RTP sender get parameters. Is there a way to just make minimal increments to those APIs to actually satisfy the needs instead of having one new method and two new attributes?
Sergio, I guess that was maybe for you.
Yeah, I think that I copied that from what it is already was already proposed in the for the header extension. So I mean, I'm fine to move it to the set codec preferences, but maybe we have to move also the header extension there, because I think that what would be where is to have different ways of enable what codecs and extension to offer.
Right. I think the big difference between the header extensions and the codecs is that we have set codec preferences, but we don't have set header extension preferences or something like that. So that's why there's some asymmetry.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe we can just add the header extension to the set codec preferences or something like that. I mean, I think that it would be good is to have the same way to enable or very similar APIs to set what codecs are being offered on one header extension, and not have two different, completely different APIs for that.
I think we've run out of time for this section. What I would recommend for this is that people discuss in the issue and try to come up with a concrete proposal. Is that an acceptable way to go forward?
Sure.
And then we
Is it-
can bring it back.
Or is it ready for PR? Like, if people can,
I think
can
it's
work
ready
on the
for
PR. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So how about ready? But let's mark it ready for PR, and then people can work on the PR. Okay. So we had simulcast issues, but we'll work on that some other day. Okay. So we have voice isolation constraints. Harold?
Yeah, so this is a very simple thing. I mean, we all know that when we're in a situation where people talk, the important thing is getting the voice. And when you set up a microphone, you get a lot of inputs, not all of it voice. And we have multiple ways of distinguishing between the human voice and other things. I mean, frequency band analysis, click elimination, and various ML approaches that claim to be doing improvements. So next slide. So we have a lot of stuff that works, but we have a lot of scenarios where those applying those methods will produce a very non-obvious and very undesired result. Try doing human voice isolation on an opera. Opera lovers will not be happy. So the important thing is not exactly what you're doing. I mean, that's something that we need to leave up for invention. The important thing is, what is the desired outcome? What is it that the user wants to have happen? Next slide. So just because we have a lot of things already that we have a well-defined method of specifying that the application wants this to happen, let's define a new Boolean constraint, either true or false. And if it's true, define the result as attempt to remove everything that's not a human voice, may also include attempt to find the most important voice and enhance that, which might be the guy in the middle of the camera, it might be the guy who's tallest, or the one who's been given the floor. That's quality of implementation. But we need to have a way for the application to say, hey, user agent, help me. Isolate just the voice and everything you can throw away that is not voice, whether it's Doritos chips or keyboard clicks or the siren of a police car going by, just get rid of it. Next slide. So the nice thing about constraint is that we have a nice way of feature detecting it, because we just call get media track capabilities, and you get the list of supported constraints. We also have to make sure that we do the right thing with noise suppression. I mean, probably if you're doing voice isolation, you also want to remove everything that is covered by noise suppression. So when voice isolation is true, we should just ignore the property of noise suppression. Next slide. So this is floating the idea to the working group. If the working group indicates that it's happy, we'll just make up a pull request, asking for the constraint to be added, and continue the discussion there. So, discuss.
Yuan?
I think it makes sense that we're doing that. I think it's really reasonable to ignore noise suppression, so which would mean that you ignore it like before applying constraint or before selecting devices and so on. There's echo cancellation as well. So all there are like various properties for which are bricks that you put in the audio pipeline, and I'm wondering whether some of them can be done serially or in parallel or not. And one of them is echo cancellation. Does it make sense to do echo cancellation, but not this property and so on as well? I'm not exactly sure. So
cancellation is in one way rather different. It's a specific source of what might sound like a human voice or might not. So I would consider that mostly orthogonal. But that's my immediate thought on this. Yeah.
So you would be able to say echo cancellation false and voice suppression true, for instance.
Yes.
Okay, and vice versa. I'm guessing some implementations might find it hard to have all the equations, like all four values implementable. And we don't have a good way of exposing these kind of constraints there, except by having applied constraints rejecting, which is a bit sad. So it's another issue I have with constraints, I guess. But yeah, that's
yes. The reporting interface of applied constraints was gutted a bit because of privacy considerations.
I'm not sure. Yeah, well, we could do things there, I guess, but still, it's yeah. Well, that's like.
So,
sorry.
If no one else is on the queue.
Yes, there is Geneva in the queue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like this. We might want to remove the part to detect that the voice is actually human. But my real question was what should the default be? And I guess we need to figure that out. There's some concerns there, maybe.
I think I'll make a pull request and we can discuss it there. My immediate thinking is that a conservative approach is to say that the default should be whatever we're currently doing, which means that it's probably a fault, voice isolation fault, because we don't do anything extra. So I'll go write a pull request. Yeah, done.
Can we mark it as the resolution as mark issue as ready for PR as well?
Seems good.
Yeah, we haven't done so, I think, very consistently for constraints, but I wonder if instead of a Boolean, a set of string values may not give us more flexibility. One could be voice isolation disabled, but for enabled values, there could be a single speaker, multiple speakers, and there could be variation on that. I mean, I'm not aware enough of the various ways this could be optimized, but Boolean has no extensibility. Strings, on the other hand, would bring us potential new values over time.
I do wonder about that. I have to think about that. Having strings also creates lots of wonderful interoperability ways of being non-interoperable. But let's discuss that on the issue.
Okay, can we move on to Elad now?
I'm ready if everybody else is. I guess we can. Next slide, please. So, hello, I'm going to discuss a suggested content handle. It's a mix between two different features that we currently have. And first, I'll remind you of the two features. So, number one, we've got content hint. So in a perfect world, you always have enough bandwidth to send at the top possible frame rate and resolution, and everything's just perfect. But we don't live there. And so it happens that we sometimes need to sacrifice one, if not both. And which one is preferable to the grade first depends on the context. So if you know that you're sending text, static content like text, then it's best to just have the highest resolution possible at the cost of frame rate. And if you're sending video, then it's a bit more towards sending higher frame rate, or at least acceptable frame rate, even at the cost of relatively low resolution. And there is a mechanism currently that allows you to set which of those you would prefer to degrade first. So it's called content hint. It's exposed on track. And if you set it to text, then when the bandwidth is not sufficient, you first degrade the frame rate, and vice versa. Not vice versa. And conversely, for motion, you first degrade the resolution and only later the frame rate. Next slide, please. Now, the second mechanism we have is called capture handle identity. And that one allows a captured tab to declare its identity in a free kind of way, any string that it would like, and it can expose its origin, etc. So I think that by now it's kind of obvious how we could marry these two. Next slide, please. Namely, when you capture something and you're just about to transmit it, if you were to know what you're capturing, you would know how to best encode it, whether you want to optimize for resolution or for frame rate. And the problem is that unless you inspect the frames, and even when you do, you don't exactly know what you're capturing. Enter capture handle identity. Now, we could kind of contort capture handle identity as it is right now to convey that information, because it allows you to declare an arbitrary string. The problem is that an arbitrary capturer would not know how to parse that string for specifically the content hint. So I suggest that we expand the capture handle so that captured content would also suggest in a structured kind of way what content hint it believes would best be set on the other side. So for example, if right now we're in Meet, if I were to capture a tab with slides, then the slides could say, you'd better optimize for text. And if the slide knew that it was going to embed a YouTube video, then it could say for motion. And there is a bit of pseudocode over there, and I think it's relatively clear. It's inside of the green rectangle. So basically the capturer says, hey, what is suggested? And if I trust this particular tab, or if I don't care, if I trust everybody, then I just set that. And that's it. That's the suggestion. And next slide, please. One thing to keep in mind is that if we accept this, we probably also want to make sure that set capture handle config can be called more than once, which is a point of slight contention between us. And the reason is that content can change. So for example, slides sometimes can embed text and sometimes can embed videos. Next slide, please. Discussion. And since nobody objects,
UN is on the queue.
I know, I just get it.
So I think that the setting the track hint is unnecessary because if a capture is setting the hint on its side, saying, hey, I'm a page, I'm text, then the user agent knows that it's capturing, that the track is capturing a page that says that it is text. And so it already knows the hint. So there's no need for the capturer to actually know the hint. The hint might only be interesting if you're using something like WebCodec, where maybe in that case, the user agent has not control of the encoder, and so might it might become useful. But I don't think that for WebRTC, I don't think there's a need, and it might actually be a bit sad that applications would have to say track content hint equals something. It should be automated. It should be the user agent that would say, oh, I'm encoding a frame that was labeled as text. So yeah, maybe let's use the encoder that is good at encoding text.
So if I understood correctly, I heard two suggestions here. One of them is that you suggested that the captured content would self-declare, but that would have an automatic effect on the capturing side. Did I understand that correctly? So basically,
not on the capturing side. The user agent might use that hint to optimize the setup of the encoder. Yeah.
Okay. So that means that basically either the user agent always believes the hint, the suggested hint, or never, right? Because the user agent is not going to give differential treatment. Whereas if you expose it to the capturing application, it can decide whether it wants to act on this suggestion or ignore it. Because it could be.
Yeah. The user agent has access to the video frames. So I guess that based on the output, it might say, oh, no, it's not good, or I don't know. But yeah, I think that it kind of makes sense that well, you have a point, but maybe I do not see how the capturer would know better whether to use the hint or not. But I still think that in any case, the user agent having access to the hint, to the images, to the video frames, might do a good job at selecting the hint or not.
That's the second thing. You also mentioned auto detection, as far as I understood. So back on the how the user agent versus the capturing application, which one has more information? The capturing application can check the origin, and if it's an origin that it allow listed, it can say, okay, I'm going to take this suggestion. And if it has not allow listed it or even block listed it, then it can just ignore the suggestion. And that's how the capturing application could have more information. And for auto detection, that does not always work as well as hand tuning. So for example, if I've got a video playing and I know that I'm only going to play 1 second, then I am not going to change the suggestion. But the user agent might not know that, oh, the application has some JavaScript code that's going to stop the video 1 second after. So it's going to, oscillate between text, motion, text, and that might not be preferable. So in general, I prefer to have more flexibility.
Should I answer, or I see people on the queue, so maybe Bernard and Univar should go, and then I can.
Okay. So I had a comment on the web codecs case. So web codecs doesn't automatically consume content hints. Web codecs considers content hints to be generic higher level information, which the application has to translate into specific encoder settings. So it's not something that you could give to the user agent. The application would actually need to know it. The capturer would need to know the hint. And then it, like as an example, if the content hint was text, we don't have this at the moment, but it's been discussed that you would like to be able to, for example, turn on screen content coding tools. But that's a codec specific web codec setting that the application would actually need to set in response to seeing the content hint change to text. So I basically support Alad's original formulation. I don't think this could be done by the user agent in every case. In WebRTC, it might be able to, but in web codecs, no.
Yeah, that's what I said as well. I said that for web codecs, exposing the hint might be useful, yeah.
Univar?
So yeah, so I think, well, I agree with you in that the user agent is in a good place to at least short circuit the part in the green rectangle here. But your slides, sorry, Alad, they allude to an API on the captured side as well that you're not showing, right?
That is correct. So we already have set capture handle config, and that one currently just accepts origin, expose or not, and an arbitrary string of the identity. And I suggest that we add one more field, and that field is called suggested content hint, and it can only accept strings which are valid content hints.
Right. So what I would propose there is that getting that information from the captured application to the user agent at least sounds valuable. And in that case, the user agent could do this automatically, at least for the case where web codecs is not used. And for web codecs, it sounds like we're talking about exposing metadata of the capture. So I have some slides, which we probably won't get to today, but that has a capture controller that might be a good place to surface that kind of information, which would be similar to. So I do see some. It could be interesting to expose that information, perhaps as metadata of the capture somewhere.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're okay with exposing this to the capturing application. You just want to continue discussing where.
For instance, it could
Yes,
be the video frame level.
Maybe.
Okay.
But I think we have some agreement that there's some need here, but the API shape is not clear yet, in my mind.
Okay, makes sense to me. I think it's been 15 minutes, so unless somebody else wants to go, I'm ready to go to the next slide section. Okay, so next topic, avoid user confusion by avoiding offering undesired audio sources, or basically, if you don't want system audio, don't ask for system audio. Next slide, please. So here's just a wall of text that basically says, currently, when you ask for screen share, you can say that the web application can say that it also wants audio. But that's a bit too coarse, because sometimes it only wants tab audio, but not system audio. For example, if video conferencing application might decide that, okay, if it's another tab, then it's very easy. I can just transmit that remotely. No echo, it works. But if it's system audio, echo cancellation might not work as well as it needs, and it might not want to even ask for it. The problem is that currently we're kind of forcing the application to ask for both, and users sometimes go and actually try to turn on system audio. And when the application just ignores that audio and does not transmit it remotely, users get confused. Next slide, please. So we see here, this is how it looks in Chrome. Basically, if you're on Windows, both sides, both the one that says entire screen as well as the one that says tab, would show a checkbox asking the user if the user wants to share audio. Ideally, we want to allow separate controls for whether the checkbox should prompt the user for that on the left and on the right independently. Next slide, please. Same thing. In this slide. So here's one suggestion of how we can do that. Could you please reload the page, Bernard?
Hold on.
Bernard? One more slide. Yes, my apologies for making it a bit harder by making the last moment change. So just an idea, it doesn't have to be exactly this API shape, but that's one API shape we can have. We can say desired sources, and then the web application can say, okay, I only want browser, and then it gets what we see here, or alternatively, browser and monitor, just monitor, etc. That's all.
Tim is in the queue.
Yeah, so is this only applicable to, is it really only relevant for echo management issues? Because if so, I feel like we're addressing in the wrong place.
No, not necessarily. I mean, it could be that an application is interested in recording, for example, for privacy reasons, right? Like maybe if you capture a specific tab and it knows via capture handle identity what you're capturing, that it deems that safe, records that everything's okay. But if you're going to record more than that, it thinks that, hey, there's potential privacy issues here. I'm not going to save this to a file, and it just washes its hands of the entire ordeal.
I don't see your API addressing that use case, because you need two sources of info to do that. So if you're saying that you'll only, so for example, if you're saying I will, as an app, as a capturing app, I will, I'm only interested in capturing audio from Google Suite apps, and I'm not going to capture from any other origin, then I don't see that your API allows you to make that checkbox come and go in that way. I don't think you're exposing the right thing to do that.
You're right that this was not the optimal example, but in that case, at least you would avoid asking for audio, and if you're capturing the entire system. But you're right that this is it is not easy for me to come up with credible examples of how you would handle it of other applications that would really need this, except for video conferencing.
I mean, I think that there is a problem here, and I'm not saying there isn't, but I think the problem is to do with our inability to manage echo, and when the echo is enabled and when it isn't, rather than to do with making this checkbox come and go.
So it's not necessarily just echo. For example, it could also be that you're inside of another room. So basically, you're actually two users, right? Like you're in a room with your laptop, and also the room has its own speakers. So it can get complicated. So even a good echo cancellation would not necessarily work there.
Right, but my point was that this is a requirement about managing echo rather than a requirement about the UI, and I think changing this UI to address echo feels like addressing the wrong solution, the wrong problem. But I mean, that's just my gut instinct. I've been messing with this space for the last couple of weeks, so I'm kind of conscious of it.
I understand, and it could be that in a perfect world where we did perfect echo cancellation, maybe we would no longer need this. But right now, we're a bit limited, and what happens is that video conferencing tools usually do not want to ask the user, or at least the ones I'm familiar with, do not want to ask the user to share system audio, but users are persistent. And the only way to communicate properly to the user, you cannot share system audio, is to just not offer system audio. So in the future, maybe this will be less useful. I agree.
Yaniva is in the queue.
Yes, so I'm actually supportive of avoiding capturing. I would actually prefer if browsers never captured system audio, because I feel that's a big privacy issue that users are not aware of. So something like this might be desirable. I was wondering, but instead of creating a new constraint, I feel like we already have one that we could use here, which is called display surface. I'm wondering if you'd thought about reusing that here. And because we have a similar debate about display surface, I have the same concerns in that debate as I have here, that we should disallow monitor so that this doesn't become an API for applications to request the thing we're trying explicitly to discourage.
I would like that, yeah, that would work for me. So basically, if I understand it correctly, you're saying exactly the same pseudocode that we see here. Instead of desired sources, we write display surface.
Yes, and whatever we decide on in our other discussion about disallowing monitor should apply here as well, I think. I would like to disallow monitor specifically here.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen because Chrome currently supports that and wishes to keep on supporting capturing system audio.
Okay, so let me not tie it to that other conversation. I think specifically for this one, we should disallow monitor. Right.
I think that we can discuss the current matter currently and the other matters another time.
Right, because I would have a concern with this API if it becomes a way for the application to request system audio.
But currently it can request system audio. It just can request all audio or no audio. So I think we're already making steps forward if we just.
But the goal is to enable an application signal to say we don't want system audio. We shouldn't have to accept that this comes part and parcel with an API, an app signal to say we want system audio.
Well, the way I see it, if an application wants to say that it doesn't want tab audio, that's also perfectly fine, so long as, you know, it doesn't make us ask for system audio more than we did before.
Okay, well, my support for this is contingent on us not supporting monitor.
I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is if we don't include monitor in the list of supported items, that doesn't mean you couldn't capture it. If you don't specify anything, there may still be the capture system audio option in the UI, but you can't ask specifically for system audio as a new feature that this API will expose. Is that what you're saying, Yaniva?
Yes. So, I mean, Chrome is still fine to implement it the way it's doing now. It's just don't want this to become a web compat issue where applications are starting to depend on, let's say, browsers in the future want to change their default to not include system audio. This shouldn't be a way to request it. But we could take this offline, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of aligning with display surface, I mean, in terms of namespace, in terms of value space, sure. In terms of name, display surface and audio are really a strange combination. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's okay, but it's a bit of weird ergonomics to speak of display surface for audio sources.
Well, the audio is still coming from, I mean, you could say the same for the values, right? Browser and monitor are also not audio. Typical
Right.
audio sources.
I mean, monitor is definitely strange. I mean,
I think that's,
I don't think I feel strongly enough about it, but
okay.
It's.
I think that's fine in that because audio is thought of as a secondary thing in get display media, at least currently.
Is there a
it
use
always
case
belongs
for,
to a display source.
Is there a use case for window? Because it seems there's a use case for tab, and that's about it. So if that's the case, then we could be more specific.
I think that eventually some browsers are going to support capturing window audio as well. And in that case, I want applications to be able to specifically say whether they want that or not. I don't see a reason to only go for tab. I understand about system audio, and I think that it's a reasonable compromise to say that if you don't specify any desired sources, you get all of them, like if you just say audio true. But if you want to specify, I'm willing to say that you can only specify browser, window, or browser and window. Yaniv, do we have a compromise here, or?
I think we have some interest here, so I think we could resolve the details on GitHub. We could probably make this ready for PR if other people agree.
Yeah,
I added that as a possible label, so you can mark that.
Just as though that it sounds like what we have, in fact, is not so much that you want to specify a display surface, but whether the audio source is strongly tied to the display surface you've picked or not. And I don't know that it makes sense to say browser or window, because in fact you would only pick one of those display surface in the end. So it may be that what we are saying is audio source display surface or audio source anything, which would open for system audio. Anyway, that's probably something we can refine.
The weird part here is that the correct answer to specify this to avoid system audio is a bit convoluted. You have to say desired sources, or you would have to remember to always include browser and window just in case a browser in the future decides to add audio window, right? So it's perhaps a less ideal surface if that's the main goal. So maybe something more specific like avoid system audio true, false would be superior.
Yeah, that's an equivalent to what I had in mind. Probably a clearer one.
I think that, yeah, sorry.
It seems to me we should continue discussions on GitHub. It seems that the scope is not yet very clear as well, whether it's tab, whether it's system audio, and so on. So that's the first thing that should be done. It's the scope. And then once the scope is clear and there's consensus, move.
So how do we clarify this scope? Because I would like to, make rapid progress here, and I still have 8 minutes, so maybe you can resolve that question now. Yuan, how do you suggest that we resolve the question of scope?
So I would enumerate the different approaches. So there's apparently avoid system surface, true, false. There is display surface, which is, the display surface and whether to include monitor or not. And there might be just restrict to tab. I don't know, these kind of things. So maybe there's one option that has consensus, like is avoid system audio having consensus, for instance?
I think that this would be a bit awkward when we eventually implement window audio, and then, okay, do we introduce avoid window audio too?
Well, why would you want to avoid window audio though?
Web developers are creative. Some users are going to capture the browser window. There could be a lot of reasons for that.
So the good thing about having separate properties, separate constraints, is that then the user agent say, "Hey, I'm supporting the this property," which might say, "Oh, so you're actually supporting recording window, for instance, audio of a window. Oh, you're supporting a recording audio of a system. Oh, you're supporting a recording audio of tab." And currently, there's no easy way for a web page to do that. So if they are trying to convey information to the user, hey, you might see this, so please do that, please click there, and so on, they might miss some information there. And so having different properties has some advantages as well.
So my personal interest is mostly in avoiding system audio. So any kind of thing, suggestion that would allow that would be an okay compromise for me. But I think that, going forward, the most flexible option is the best option. And that is to just allow the web developer to specify which sources he is interested in. And we don't need to think about why. But that's my opinion.
So harping back to my echo cancelling point, can we say something like that this constraint lets you say you only want that checkbox if the source is capable of being echo cancelled?
I actually think echo cancellation is a secondary concern. You want to not capture system audio because there suddenly might come up voices from the next tab and disclosing that you have an incoming call from some person you'd rather not tell the other guy about.
But that's also true for window.
Yep. But it's,
I take your point. There's a privacy concern as well.
Yeah, but it's definitely not about echo cancellation. That was my point. And as Elad says, if we just offer the capability, we don't have to worry about why.
But if you knew that echo cancellation would work, then maybe you want window. And if you know that it don't, doesn't, maybe you don't want to offer it. Like the way this was presented, and certainly from my experience, the reason you don't want people to pick this is because it sounds terrible, or at least in large part. So I feel like by not exposing that, we're kind of in the constraint, we're kind of hiding, pretending the problem isn't the problem it really is.
Well, we're addressing the problems that we're able to address right now when we've got imperfect echo cancellation. That's number one. And number two is we don't need to do everything with one API, right? So an application could, using a different API, find out, okay, but which sources would be echo canceled well, and then it could request those. Or if it's got other criteria for making a decision about which sources it wants, it can, use both sources of information to make the decision.
Yeah, but I think that this is a nice place to put this because you're not offering the user something that you're pretty confident won't work. Like, what I like about this is you're stopping the user from choosing something that's going to go bad on them, and I claim that at least part of the kinds of things that can go bad, and I take the privacy point, but the other thing that can go bad is echo cancelling, and the user agent is conscious of what it's currently capable of, and therefore that information is already visible to it and frankly to nobody else. And so I contend that it would be really useful to allow that hint to cover this, explicitly cover can it be echo cancelled properly or not?
I'm not an expert on echo cancellation, unfortunately, but the way I understand it, it's not a binary thing, right? It's not you either do perfect echo cancellation or not at all. And it is up to an application to decide whether whether it's happy with the results. So I don't see how the user agent could make that decision on behalf of the application, given that whatever decision it makes would have to apply to all applications.
Well, I mean, I don't know the certainly my experience is there are some things echo cancel well and some things don't, and though that is fairly closely tied to whether it's in the browser or whether it's not in the browser at the moment.
We have Yaniva in the queue.
Yeah, so I think we have the situation that I'm concerned about is if this API surface, as described right here, would appear to allow someone to pass in only the monitor value and thus be able to sway the user to picking a full screen capture when they otherwise would have picked a tab capture. That would be really bad. So as long as we can have some language to prevent that, I don't think I care that much about the API surface.
Yeah, I think we've agreed on that, Yanivar.
Okay. All right, so then I suggest we bike shed on GitHub.
Cool.
So can we move on to the last item?
Sounds good. Okay, so crop target and region capture is a new API, and it's actively being developed in Chrome. So we have some issues that might have an impact on API shape, and it would be great if we could have an understanding of the API shape as soon as possible. So there are like there are 4 issues, but 3 of them are being discussed right now. One is whether we want to expose the creation of crop target either to element or media devices. The second one is whether the creation of a crop target, we want it to be a method or an attribute. And the third one is whether we want to return the result of this method as a promise, or whether it's async or sync, basically. next slide. So let's look at all of these like in 3 slides. So first issue is whether we want to attach the API to element itself or media devices. So a crop target is basically an object that is encapsulating a pointer to an element, a remote identifier of an element. So we could either call element.getCropTarget, and then you get your crop target, or as it currently done in Chrome prototype, you would call something like navigator.mediadevices.produceCropTarget and pass the element as a parameter. So the advantages for media devices option is that you're grouping the API to capture related stuff in a media related place. So it's some might say that it's easing documentation and searchability. The advantages for element is first, in terms of documentation searchability, we already have partial interfaces. So for instance, there's element request full screen, and request full screen is a kind of media API. And it's okay to put it directly on the element because it's tied to the element itself. And the second bonus is that the element and the crop target are tied together, but they are not tied to the media devices itself. And by putting it at the element level and not the media devices, we avoid some corner cases. For instance, media devices is attached to a single document. So you could call media devices produce crop target on an element that is not attached to the same document as the media devices object. And this might have an impact. For instance, the media devices might be neutered if its own document is detached, and then it would throw or it would reject the promise, even though the element is perfectly fine. And of course, an element might be added or removed from documents. This is the DOM. But media devices is not able to follow. It's tied to a document and it will stick to media devices. A third point is that media devices is secure context and element is not. And you might still want to create a crop target for an element in non-secure context. That's still something that might be possible to use. So my recommendation is to move to element. As I see it, there's not a lot of downsides, and it seems easier to just call getCropTarget without any parameter. Thoughts? Yanivar, you're on the queue.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the problem with putting it on media devices is that then we have 2 relevant objects, and that's more than one what we need. So I think the media devices object here is actually an irrelevant object. I would vote for element.
Elad?
Yes, I'm voting for media devices, and the reason is, as you have stated, that it is right next to getDisplayMedia. It provides nice encapsulation of related APIs, and right now, Element has, you've chosen one example of something that is exposed on Element. The problem is that you've got hundreds of examples, I think, because there are so many things that are currently exposed on Element, and I think that it would be good to stop that.
Why? I mean, crop target is being used by MediaStream Track. It's not being used by getDisplayMedia.
I'm sorry, so could you say that again?
Crop target is used by MediaStream Track. It's not used by getDisplayMedia, for instance. So I do not see why media devices is tied to that, and it's really tied to an element, not to its media devices. So you prefer to have some quirks for a benefit that is what you're claiming documentation. And
so just a sec. So you've made 2 claims here. Number one, it is actually related to getDisplayMedia because you can only crop something that you got through getDisplayMedia, and that's why it needs to be adjacent in my mind. And number 2 is that there don't necessarily have to be any side effects to putting it on media devices, because call it with one MIDI devices or call it with another, it doesn't matter. You get two crop targets. Either you get the same one because the function actually put it directly on the element behind the scenes, or you get equivalent crop targets. It doesn't really matter.
That's not true currently on Chrome's implementation.
That is true, but it could be true on Chrome's implementation if we take some time to fix it. And also, there is nothing preventing us from implementing it like that.
I believe that if media devices is neutered, so if its document is detached, you will have difficulties shipping anything but rejecting the promise, because that's something that is very natural and is being used a lot. So it would be counterintuitive to actually undo current Chrome's behavior and do what you're suggesting.
It is not clear to me why the promise once produced cannot outlive media devices.
That's usually what APIs are doing currently on the web. So if you're calling get user media on an iframe that is detached, then it will reject. And a lot of promises are doing exactly that, and that's the web.
I don't want to dive too deeply because I know that you've got a couple of more slides and also more people in the queue.
Yaniva?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I was hoping others would have. I just want to say that I don't see that the media devices object has anything to do with what's being captured on the captured side, right? This is where this could be a page that doesn't even have HTTPS. So,
yep,
and so secure context, yes. So this seems like a no-brainer to me. I would like to hear how we would solve, and why are we not concerned about capture of non-secure context?
I don't think that non-secure contexts are very interesting use cases. I think that those are disappeared quickly, and I don't think that anything that you get from a non-secure context should even be trusted in any way. So when you get a crop target from that, I would just ignore it if I were a well-structured application.
Thoughts from others?
I mean, I'm not very deep on the topic, but I tend to agree that element feels like a more natural target, if only because what you're really doing is getting. I mean, you don't even have to pass the element as a parameter as a result. Yeah, right now, I guess I'm not finding a lot of strong advantages to using media devices. I think the ergonomic argument plays both ways. So.
Yuan, would you like to proceed to the next topic?
I would prefer that we try to get consensus there. I don't know how we could do that.
I agree.
Do you have an idea of how we can proceed?
Not really, but I will check to see whether it is something that we could compromise on, if though, so we can continue on GitHub or get back to this. I also think that this is not the most important issue that we have here, because worst case scenario, if we change the decision later, it's not a difficult transition to say, okay, we also expose it on element, and then to say a bit later, and now we only expose it on element. So I see an easy transition there, if necessary.
Would this be? Would it be helpful to ask the tag on this? Because this seems like a fairly simple API question to me. Whether you have an object with a method or a method on a different object that takes the object as a parameter.
Sure. I believe the tag has actually discussed this today, and their minutes will eventually be published.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess we can wait for the tag input and see what they have to say about this, and we can restart the discussions on this topic next. So next issue. So in case of exposing API at the element level, so let's say now we expose it to element. API can either be a method or an attribute. So there are two things there. If you're using an attribute, then you're somehow mandating that a single crop target is generated by element. So while for a method, the usual thing that happens is that you will get a different crop target every time you call the method. That's typical for web APIs, which means, so one thing to note is that it's already possible to generate several crop targets that will reference to the same element, given crop target is serializable. I don't have a strong opinion there. Initially, I was for an attribute, but I would be okay with an element if some people really have really strong feelings about it. So let's say it's put at the element. Which one would you pick?
Ed?
So I would go with the method, and the reason is that there could be a cost to actually doing that, and I want to dissuade applications from just inspecting that for no reason. And the way that there is a cost for this is that currently what we do is, as soon as you mint the crop target, we mark the element throughout the rendering pipeline, and that means that the element gets rare data. Rare data is a mechanism by which Chrome makes sure that elements are relatively small, and only those that need a bit more information actually allocate that extra information. And it's better if those are not created unnecessarily.
So I think you said also that you wanted to do lazy surface tagging so that the creation would have almost no cost. Your implementation is in this current state, but I think I heard that you were hoping to make it lazily tagging. So in that case, your argument would basically like
that. Yeah, the lazy tagging would not actually, if we put things on element itself, then lazy tagging would be, okay. It's a bit of a longer discussion because it also depends on in which document it is, and then when the element gets moved, okay, because basically what you're saying is if you do lazy tagging, then you don't actually tag the element, you just put the tag on the document itself.
Or as a map. You do not need to make the element bigger if you need to. It's just an implementation detail.
I would have to think about this, but I still think that for so long as some implementations or some reasonable implementations actually have a cost, then it and the side effect, then it makes sense if get crop target is a method, just to make that a bit more evident to web developers.
I see Yoniva on the queue.
Yeah, so again, I also, to save some time, I think this should be on the element. It should be an attribute. It should not be a promise. So to jump ahead a slide. I mean, I would like to cite the principle, design principle of simplicity. We should prefer simple solutions. And the way I view simplicity is mostly to prefer the priority constituencies being the user and the web developers, and all the concerns we've heard so far to pick something other than that have been implementation concerns, which I think, as long as this is implementable the right way, we should implement it, the nicest, simplest API.
I just want to say that I see the constituencies as a weighted average and not as a, first past the post kind of thing. I think that, yes, it is important. Users don't care here. Web developers barely care about these small differences. It's going to be equally useful for them anyway. So then it actually matters a lot for implementation. I see Harold is on the queue next.
I just want to make sure that I have said that I disagree with Yaniva on every single point. I think messing with element is bad for the web platform. It's already doing far too much. It's a god object. And the exposing the fact that these mechanisms have costs is a guidance to the user towards don't use them if you don't want to pay that cost. And doing the promise is this particular interface connects to methods that go between different processes. Not necessarily get crop target itself. It's possible to do that elsewhere, but it's also reasonable to have implementations that go between processes. And then promise is the right approach. So keep it away from element, because element is a bad place to be. Keep it a method, because it actually has costs to run it. And keep it a promise, because that allows implementations that would be impossible if you do it as an attribute. And it's not that much. It exposes the cost to the user instead of trying to hide it behind something that looks simple but isn't. So, disagreement stated.
All right, I'd like to respond. So I basically disagree with everything Harald said. So the cost here sounds like it's in Chrome. There shouldn't be a cost. I think that's a bug, because the real name for this should really be, to isolate properties here, the attribute should be really transferable reference. That's all it is, because the element itself, it wouldn't be needed if we could reference the element directly. So, and that should not be a costly operation. I think that would be a bad implementation if the user references and creates a lot of crop targets. That should not be, that should not cause any bad side effects, because, and just for the other audience here, there's nothing that needs this to be a promise, because it's not like this would immediately affect cropping. This is just so that we have something to pass to a different process that might be calling crop2, where the crop2 method is asynchronous. And so there's all the time in the world at that level to inspect these elements, which they really are, whether you know them through a reference object like this, which is really what it is. So there's really no need for a promise or a method or for this to be on media devices. So I'd like the need to be documented to not choose the simplest API here.
I agree with Jan-Ivar there. I think that we identified some flaws in Chrome's current implementations in terms of memory and so on. This has been discussed, and I think there was consensus, and there were some changes needed there anyway. And so that could change. I'm hoping that it could change your position on Chrome's side. But in any case, we should look at what is being feasible to do in a natural way, and what other APIs have done in the past. And other APIs in the past have put APIs on element because it makes sense. Other APIs in the past have looked at whether it's synchronous or not, and if it can be done synchronous, they use promises. And the same for attribute versus methods. So if you look at how web APIs are consistent, and if we want to keep consistency between this API and the other web APIs, then we should use what other APIs are doing. And the good thing about other APIs is that they are implemented, and we know for sure that it's feasible to do without too much implementation issue. Dominique, Dom, you're on the queue?
Yeah, something Jan-Ivar said makes me wonder if, in fact, we should be looking at something that is a transferable reference rather than a crop target.
That's the fourth issue.
Okay. I mean, are there other APIs that would benefit from having this transferable targets?
That's a very good question that I asked on GitHub. There's a GitHub issue for that. And that's something we should dig in, because that will impact the name of crop target, for instance.
Exactly.
Because-
Actually, if I could just go a bit over time and answer this, and my argument is that we've never not identified any such API, but even if we will in the future, it's actually by design that crop targets can only be used for cropping, because right now you mint that and you pass that cross to another cross document, right? And you do that with the safety of knowing that it cannot be used for anything in the future that you did not think of as a web developer. So it would be bad design to, in the future, decide that everybody who did cropping is now also trusting the other side for something else.
You can check that in the crop to method. That's where you do
No.
validity input checking.
No. Because right now, if it's the other way around. If I have a crop target and they post it and it exposes more information in the future, then me as a web developer who currently saw that it was not exposing any information and they passed it and I thought I was safe, in the future, suddenly it turns out that I passed more information than I intended.
Not
But
necessarily
future
more
APIs
information. It might be used in places you might not have thought it would be used. Yes. And if we change the name and we change the way we look at that, then we should take that into account. Thinking, yeah, there might be new APIs, new places, and it should be safe. It should be safe to use the same object on the two APIs.
But those future unsafe APIs need to be written, so we could make sure to not make them unsafe.
Well, the one problem here is that you're suggesting and creating a completely general mechanism that can have many possible applications, and using that and which can have lots of implications that cannot be evaluated because they don't exist yet, and using that to block a very narrow and specific interface that is going to be used for one thing only. I'm not sure we are the right group to introduce very, very wide-ranging interfaces like an element reference that can be used across that process.
Well, but we're just talking about naming.
May I point out that we are over time now?
So how should we proceed then, Bernard? Because these issues have been discussed for like 1 or 2 months, and basically I think that in terms of implementers, we are pretty clear about what people think, but we need still to make a decision.
It feels to me that there is a narrow crop target discussion and a broader platform integration question. And maybe we can start with the solution to the narrow thing and evaluate whether there is a migration path to maybe the right solution, if there is a different right solution. And working on the right solution, I think, as Harold suggested, probably requires reaching out to a group that would be the right place for this broader solution. But that again would require, I think, working through this other potential API users of this broader concept.
Well, I think that's a mischaracterization of one position here, though. I think we're not saying this should be a broader solution. We're saying these are the standard web patterns that API has influenced API design for a long time, and there's no need to. We shouldn't depart from those standards without good reason, and I don't think we've heard good reason from implementers.
So to be clear, my point was, I think the API shape, until we discuss the name, is definitely something where we should follow the co-path.
Okay,
but if we are looking at broadening the scope of crop target, then I think we are starting a very different conversation, one that I find very interesting, but a very different one.
Yeah, so that's why it was separated. For this meeting, it was separated. It was API shape, and there was this fourth issue that we might talk later, but not for this meeting.
I don't think anyone's blocking on the name.
Oh, okay. By the way, in one of the emails, if I'm not mistaken, about call for consensus, the name was actually brought up as a block in concern. So, and by UN and Yanivar, you agreed. So, Yanivar,
No,
I'm hearing that you are not going to block on the name now. UN, what about you?
As I said, I raised the concern that there were some issues and that they should be documented. That was my concern, and I think we resolved it by saying, "Hey, we are not sure about the naming," and that's a good solution for me right now. I think that we should try to solve these issues on time, and I'd like to focus on these three issues there, which is sync or not sync, element or not, or media devices, and attribute or method, because these three are pretty specific, isolated, and we should be good. We are the WebRTC working group that should make the decision there. And my understanding is that we have identified that if we look at the patterns that are used currently in the web APIs, then we have a natural choice. And that's the one I would push for using.
I agree.
So I'm not sure how we can make progress. There's the tag information for the first issue, but for the second and third issue, I'm not sure the tag will give input. Or
By the way,
was it mentioned as well?
So TAG already approved the entire design before, and now they've been asked to weigh in on those particular issues, and
So all three of them?
they say.
All three of them? All three
Yes.
of them? Okay,
Yes.
cool.
But let's say that they come back and the answer is not totally conclusive and nobody changes their mind. I suggest that one way that we could proceed is that we can have this particular API accepted. We go with that, and we consider migration paths in the future when it's when Mozilla and Apple have also implemented this, are ready to ship it, and say, hey, this is now synchronous for us. And so that's one option. Another one is that you could always polyfill this, so it's much easier to polyfill one in one direction, right? Like you can make sure that the the asynchronous, the synchronous one can make itself. Okay.
And I guess we are way out of time, so the chairs will convene and propose a path forward.
Yeah, so we might be at the point where opinion polls might be useful, because given that TAG has already reviewed this, it doesn't seem to be all that great chance of waiting for another TAG review of the specific questions. But
to clarify,
my third chair has the one chair that isn't strongly opinionated on the matter seems to have dropped off. So we might have to take this back to the chairs meeting.
And I think we need to adjourn, having lost more than half of the participants. So.
I think the polyfill question is actually a place to attack it from next time we meet. I think that actually might narrow the answer space.
Okay.
One quick question: how would an opinion poll help here, given that we know everybody's opinions, right? Like,
well, there might be people who haven't spoken up yet.
You don't know my opinion, because I don't either.
As you can see.
That is correct. But if you knew, for example, that you could have it tomorrow if your opinion changed, then I'm not sure. There are browsers, right? Browser vendors have one set of criteria, and web developers have another. And different web developers might change their mind based on, okay, how quickly can I have it? And it's unclear to me how to evaluate such opinions.
Well, I mean, I can give you the way this has been looked at in the tag before. The future is longer than the past. And so if it's gaining 1 month of availability against having bad API forever, or a bad API that is hard to move away from, then I think the calculation points towards taking an additional month. But of course, nothing is that black and white. But just to say that time to market is a pretty weak argument for rushing a design in general for the platform.
No, I meant that the web developer would want to have it sooner and therefore would care, because in this particular case, I think that the web developers would not actually care about the shape, right? The shapes are almost identical as far as the web developer is concerned.
Yeah,
So
and that I think is a reasonable argument. I mean, there is a cost in the mental model if indeed you can't use your existing understanding of the platform to navigate that specific API. But in this particular case, I don't disagree with you that the mental cost is pretty limited.
Okay, I think we need to end the call.
Yeah.
And the chairs will discuss further about how to resolve these issues.
Okay, thank you.
Recording. Settings. Stop recording.